Our first item of business is a briefing on the Cure Violence Annual Report. And I see we have for Mr. Davis up to talk to us.
Well, good afternoon, Mayor, Commissioners, and Public Safety Committee. Thank you all for the opportunity to provide this update on the Cure Violence Annual Report for 2025. Today we'll do a couple of things. We'll talk about how the Cure Violence model works for those who may not be familiar with it. Then we'll also have the opportunity to dig into the 2025 accomplishments, which are vast. There is data to talk about, so we'll talk through some of those data. Some of that data we'll talk about goals and next steps, and then there'll be an opportunity for questions. I am joined today by Mr. Eric Brown from the Urban League and members of his team, including Jeff Ridgway and Dr. Stephen Worst. They are all a part of the Cure Violence work, and we're really grateful for the partnership that we have with the Grand Rapids Urban League, which serves as the implementing agency for Cure Violence and has been doing that work since its start.
Mayor, just as a matter of protocol, how much time, since we started late, do we have the committee members here for? Does anybody have a... Okay, one. Anyone else? Cut off? Okay. So I would ask the presenters to keep in mind we have 3 topics to get through in an hour.
So maybe 20 minutes. Or...
I will do my slides very fast.
Okay.
All right, so whenever we talk about Cure Violence in Grand Rapids, we think about this phrase: imagine our city without violence. And really the answer that Cure Violence brings forth is yes, we can have a city without violence. So how does the model work? Well, the model is based on a health approach. Really what this model looks at is the root causes of violence as opposed to just looking at the symptoms of that violence. The model looks at 3 major areas. So there's the interruption and transmission of violent behavior, reducing the highest risk, and also changing community norms. So when we talk about detecting and interrupting potentially violent conflicts, that's the day-to-day work that our violence interrupters do when they're on the ground. They also work to identify and treat the individuals with the highest risk for either experiencing the violence or perpetrating the violence, and also recognize the language there. Treat the highest risk individuals. The goal there is to help them stop, as opposed to only looking at it from a penal perspective. We recognize that, looking at violence reduction is a community approach. It's not just the work that's done by Cure Violence. There's also the police department and other partners. But each of us play different roles in the way that that's done. So from a Cure Violence perspective, it's not about punitive action. It's about treating the individuals to help them change those norms, which is the next part of that, which is mobilizing the community to change norms. And then there's also the collection of evidence-based data, which was one of the reasons we chose the Cure Violence model in the first place. So with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Brown. Oh, actually, I'll turn it over to Mr. Brown, who will introduce his team from here.
All right, thank you, Brent, Mr. Davis. As Mr. Davis said, I have with me Dr. Worst, who does our data analytics, since it's very much a database, evidence-based driven program. And I'll, in just a slide, be turning it over to Jeff Ridgway, our program manager and site director for Cure Violence. Violence interrupters, they perform the intervention services for what we do. These are credible messengers that are, for those that may not be familiar with the model, real briefly, credible messengers are those people from the community who have voice in the community, they have respect in the community, and they can be able to speak into people being able to make changes, and in most instances because they can show from their own lives that they've been able to come out of those environments and make the very exact same changes that they're trying to encourage others to make. And we seek out in the intervention. We like to refer to it more as interruption. We seeking out the highest risk individuals. We're seeking out those individuals that are carrying guns, that have been exposed to gun violence. And quite frankly, in many instances, our street team as the interrupters and outreach specialists are referred to are in conversations with folks that are carrying guns at the time. I mean, you can't get to the highest need if you're not willing to do that. So we know that. But we have to, again, keep our arm's distance from law enforcement in order to be able to maintain that trust with the young people that we're trying to reach. And I'll say, when I say young people, our target age group, I think people need to be reminded of that. Our target age group is 14 to 25. 14 to 26 is our target age group. And then after these interrupters are able to reach these folks that are in these areas and to get them to put down weapons and things like that, they turn them over to outreach specialists, and outreach specialists are able to connect them to the other resources that they need within the community to be able to move away from the path that they're on and a more positive path, to be able to find their purpose. Again, a lot of time we're referring them in-house, Urban League of West Michigan. We have wraparound services, housing, education, health, and so on and so forth, employment, so that we're able to help them find some of these other resources. And Mr. Ridgway may be able to get a little bit deeper into how we're able to do that with our R&Rs. But we're able to provide them, if we don't have the in-house resources, we have connections vast throughout the community to help them find what they need. And I will turn it over to Mr. Ridgway for 6 time.
Good afternoon. So, Jeff Ridgway, as we see the accomplishments here, Cure Violence in Grand Rapids has engaged in 4,266 interactions. That's over 20 interactions per day that they've worked over the fiscal year 2025. Our accomplishments, there are 127 interruptions. That means that they have actually stopped a violence participation or people participating in violence of high-risk individuals. In addition to that, there's 288 interactions where the community was mobilized and mediations occurred. Now, that number totals 415 interactions for the fiscal year 2025. Why is that significant? Because the National Institute of Criminal Justice Reform has indicated that when a fatality doesn't occur, that saves the community $1.6 million. When a gunshot wound, someone goes to the hospital, a gunshot wound, and doesn't die from that, it's a saving of $1.1 million to the community. And the thing that's important about that, these are the unseen things that we don't know. You just don't know about it if it doesn't happen. And just want to highlight that part. In addition to that, some of the community events we've done a number of different community events, City Vibes that we put on with the city, with the OPA office. We just completed flag football. All of these things help to change norms within our community. In addition to that, as you heard Mr. Brown say, we have a referral service. So our outreach specialists and our violence interrupters refer individuals to different services so that they can reach their full potential, so that they can reach their own goals that they set for themselves. We use the wraparound services that we have right there at the Urban League primarily, but we also reach out to other community members to accomplish that. So I want to highlight just 2 particular success stories. One is a participant who completed our program, and what we call that is actually called a success story. And this individual was a high-risk individual, had a number of different issues and problems, but his one talent, what he really enjoyed doing, was art. He did art so well that his art has been displayed throughout Grand Rapids, and he actually did an art gallery exhibit at UCR. And the Urban League also helped him start his own business. So here's a chance where a person, a high-risk individual, is now able to contribute to society as a business owner. The next one is high risk or honor roll. Our outreach specialists have been able to play a critical role in a number of our high schools. One in particular where they had 20 high-risk individuals. As of this last card marking, 6 has made the honor roll. As we know, education is a gateway to further improvement in one's life, and this is the way that we're showing it. And now I ask Dr. Wirtz to come up.
Good afternoon. One of the things about these anecdotal examples is that it's part of our data that we collect, and that is extremely important in how we go forward. The part of the data that I'm going to spend just a very few minutes bringing you up to date on is more qualitative or quantitative, and it has to do with the target areas. These are the 3 target areas, as you know, that Cure Violence Grand Rapids has identified. All of them are adjacent to each other, and they fall within each one of the, primarily fall in within each one of the 3 wards of Grand Rapids. We have Fuller Avenue to the east, we have Michigan Street to the north, Hall Street to the south, and Godfrey, Market, and Monroe to the west. Over the past 54 months, going up through the end of fiscal year 2025, the 3rd Ward target area saw a 50% decrease in murders. It saw a 40.1% in a reduction of aggravated assaults. The 3rd Ward, or the 1st Ward target area, saw a 19.9% decrease in aggravated assaults and a 66.7% decrease in murders over those 54 months. The 2nd Ward also saw a 50% decrease in murders, but in that particular target area, we continue to see an increase in aggravated assaults, a 14.73% increase over those 54 months. And Jeff can comment a little bit on perhaps the reason for that. Just to break that down, this is a look at the 1st Ward target area over the past 54 months up through the end of June 2025. And you see that the decrease in aggravated assaults is significant. Murders there have decreased, as I said before, by 66.7%. It's the 2nd Ward. There's been a slight increase, but the one encouraging thing is murders in the 2nd Ward target area have decreased by 50% over those 54 months. The increase is sometimes, to make sense of that, is due to a very, very different demographic in the 2nd Ward. And largely, it's a demographic that involves persons involved in crime that are outside of our target age group. The 3rd Ward target area has seen, since it began in the 54 months ago, a 40.1% decrease. And murders there have also decreased by 50% over the same period up through the end of fiscal year 2025. If we were to just look at the last 3 fiscal years, this is what it would look like. The data are moving downward in the 1st and 3rd Ward target areas and slightly upward in the 2nd. The encouraging piece about that 2nd Ward is that the increases have decreased each month since May of this year. So the increase is a little discouraging, but the amount of increase decreases every month.
No, you got this last slide first. So this one and then this.
Okay, yep. Pretty good information that you guys were shared with there. Thank you for the team. The Urban League is encouraged to continue the relationship and the partnership with the city to help be part of the answer to decrease crime in our community. What we're hoping to do is be able to influence long-term change and find other opportunities for high-risk individuals as we're able to help move them out of that high-risk category, moderate risk and then low risk and on out. We need to make sure that the community is around to help support, to continue to make sure that they have employment, career opportunities, housing, stable homes, et cetera, which talks about the underlying socioeconomic inequalities that fuel gun violence, all of those disparities. Research shows that those that have been incarcerated and have been in lives that have had violence, gun violence, they cite those factors as contributors to them being going down a path that that involved gun violence. We want to continue to engage, mobilize, empower youth in our community. These are my 5 E's right here, so you got them right there. Enthusiasm, effort, execution, excellence, and then continuing to evolve. We want to be able to engage the community. Mr. Ridgway talked about the Youth Football League. If we have, one thing I've heard consistently over the last 3 years is when people run into me and you're the president CEO of the Urban League, kids don't have anything to do. Kids don't have anything to do. Kids don't have anything to do. My former next door neighbor when I was a kid his name was Sergeant, or I called him Mr. Booker, but Sergeant Booker. He was an early person within the minority, a black man within the police force that was a sergeant. And I learned from his sons later that he was very influential back in the 50s and 60s of making sure that kids were getting into using boxing as an alternative in violence. And there's so many resources. We're looking forward to talking with somebody about a rugby league, making sure that they're getting connected back at education and growing at Ottawa and getting more of our students on the honor roll so that they're able to see a path outside of gun violence. So the work is going great. We're looking forward to continuing that, and we want to continue to embrace the city as well as other partners around the city that need to get involved in this work. And with that being said, any questions? Any questions?
Mr. Feigl.
Yeah, a bit of an introductory question, but I mean, my impressions of this, I think this is fantastic that we're taking a preventionary approach to violence. It's a public health approach, which is fantastic. I also love that it's data-driven. So what I'm most curious about is what is the first point of contact for candidates who would be a fit for this program? How are you reaching out to them? What does that first impression look like?
So some of the first impressions are referrals from other kids that are within the system, school districts. We also have a great relationship with the juvenile detention center, so we get referrals from there. We have relationships with the probation officers. Those are some of the first areas that people are able to, and then through our community events, we have moms that will bring their sons or their nephews up here and say, hey, can you guys help us? So there are various approaches, but those are just some of the more institutional ones. One additional.
Our violence interrupts are in the community. They canvass the streets. They are there engaging with whoever they feel based on their credibility and their interest in those communities to connect with them to stop violence before it occurs. So that's one of the main things they do, along with all the things that Mr. Brown mentioned. So we're actually in the community, on the streets, every single day that they work.
I love that you're taking a very relational approach to it, and you have a lot of credibility, and that's fantastic.
Absolutely, and thanks, Jeff. Jeff obviously works a lot more close, but yeah, thank you for sharing that. In the right, I say thank you. That's a very critical part of it, is having people within the community. When I asked Cure Violence Global, how do they espouse the violence reductions, they basically is what they said was time in the community. So yes, thanks, Jeff, for bringing that to our attention.
So I noticed that you said you got about 300, and maybe you didn't, I'm not sure, you said interactions that led to mediation. So you're not saying you did 300 mediations. But can you speak a little more to that? Is that did you use the Center for Mediation? And when you're doing mediation, what does that exactly look like? And then also, how did you identify the people who needed mediation? Was there a police report that triggered it?
In general, no, Mayor. It's not generated by the police report. It's generated by the relationships that's already been established. For instance, when we know someone's coming home from prison, a lot of times there's beefs that haven't been settled yet. We are engaged with mediating that, making sure we sit down with all parties to stop something from happening. Do we do it? Does it happen all the time? No. But there's a lot of times that we have, and that's in that number. Other times is when something happened between two groups of people, are upset or if they're on social media and they're communicating. We engage them to sit down and mediate another way to solve their problems other than gun violence. So that's also in those numbers. And it happens almost every single day of the year. And again, these are numbers that you just won't see. And how are these numbers reported? They're reported within the Cure Violence Global ComCare software system.
Okay.
They get trained from Cure Violence.
Yes, and of course, they get trained from Cure Violence on mediation and also how to report that information in the ComCare system.
If I can add one thing to that. So the whole idea behind the concept of how Cure Violence would work and why we selected Cure Violence was that we had violence interrupters. These were credible messengers who are closely connected to community. So the way the information comes in is through those close connections. So because the violence interrupters are canvassing on a regular basis, they have relationships where they're able to essentially get word of the things that are happening and then have those sit downs to do the mediation.
So my next question is, and maybe this is for your statistician, but we've had in the last 4 years a broad drop in crime nationwide, like every urban core has had a drop. So how do these percentages relate to national statistics? I mean, I just pulled up New York and it looks like they had a 50% drop in murder in the last year, not in the last 4 years. So are we beating comparable city trends? Are we behind comparable city trends?
For this period of fiscal year 2025, I'm just happy to report that Grand Rapids murders for that period were down 45%.
Over the last 4 years?
No, over the last, for the 4 years, yes.
Okay.
And then aggravated assaults were down 4.68%.
Yeah, I saw that. The question is, do you have any national benchmarking?
We do, but I don't have them with me now.
Okay, thanks.
And how are you attributing that to the measures and qualities of your program? How is that being measured in that regard?
Sure. So the thing about Cure Violence, it's not a singular solution. We recognize that it is the global approach of all of the different aspects that come together to reduce violence in community, including the police department, the work that's done by neighborhood associations and neighbors individually, other nonprofit organizations, and of course the work that's done by Cure Violence as well. So we cannot say violence is only reduced because of Cure Violence. However, the work that's being done by Cure Violence, in addition to what's happening across other areas of community, helps to reduce the violence.
Is there any way we can get a breakdown of those other 4,000 interactions or what have you, based upon each ward, just to see? And then also, what's the current staffing looking like for your particular program?
We can get the breakdown by ward, I'm sure, and then staffing, I'll turn you off.
Staffing currently, we have a staff of 11. When we have full FTE, we have a site director, program manager, we have a site supervisor, and then we also have been added at the supervisory level. We have a full-time person that has mental health background. They're trained in mental health to be able to work with not only with our staff, because with credible measures, they need to be healthy mentally, be able to work with folks that come out of similar backgrounds. And then we have a street team of 8, so 4 interrupters, and then 4 outreach specialists. So yeah, that's what the current staffing looks like right now. And we definitely will get that other information broken down by ward. The one thing I do want to emphasize is that we talk about the target areas because we can look at how crime has decreased across the city in entirety, and then we can compare that to others. But specifically with those deep dives, being able to go into those target areas, we started off in 3rd Ward. Double-digit success out the gate. We're asked to expand to the 2nd and 3rd Ward because it was reflective that when we spent time in those targeted areas, it was definitely, there was a correlation, not a cause and effect, but a correlation between the time that we spent in those communities to the decrease in crime. Again, as Mr. Davis said, one of many of doing operations, but if you look at specifically those target areas.
Mayor. I just wanted to respond to our comment on the observation earlier about the national trends in crime and violent crimes particularly. And I think we've all seen a reduction since COVID in general, but there still are communities who are having increases in homicide. Hartford Connecticut, Milwaukee, Little Rock, Virginia Beach, they're all seeing higher trends this year, 2025, than last year. And previously, there were other communities that saw an increase in 2024. So I think the good news is, yes, we are aligning, I think, with the majority of communities, and we need to continue to do everything that we can, both from a law enforcement adjacent, neighborhoods, to continue this kind of collective impact work to drive the violence down in our community.
Sir, and with that, City Manager, I did want to mention that Cure Violence is one of the approaches we take as an organization, as a city, to address the civilian side of violence reduction. We recently hired Letitia Lipscomb, who's with us today as well, and she is our Civilian Violence Intervention and Prevention Manager, and she works not only with Cure Violence, but also on the remainder of the strategy, ways that we can partner with community organizations and individuals to drive violence down.
Yeah, I think, I don't want to get too deep into it, but, when you have multi-axis causative theories, it's very, very hard to disaggregate and attribute a specific cause to a specific intervention, which at the end means, I think, that we have to be clear-eyed that some of this is a sociological narrative justification and not a data justification, because you simply can't find cause and effect here as cleanly as we might expect. And that's one of the reasons why I don't doubt you're working in the second ward, but the numbers aren't looking good. The question is whether the work is worth doing. And I think there you can come down to the question of, are these anti-violence, are they targeted at interrupting the root causes? Are you being careful to target high-risk individuals? And so, for example, I applaud that, and I think that's all. But I think we got to be. This is not just we have data. This is also, we have a narrative theory. So, for example, the gentleman who now, I actually met him at a neighborhood function where he was selling his art, and that's great. And we don't need him to go commit a crime so we can prove that he needs to have a path to success, right? We need to identify people who we know need some hope and need a path in the future. And, a lot of our city programming is based not on, you did something bad, so now we'll intervene, but on, the city managers work, for example, on simple employment opportunities and, simply getting people things to do at night in the city. Those are based on some basic narratives. They're not based on data. That's based on, it makes sense that you want kids to be able to not get in trouble at night. Like everyone up here was a teenager at one point. None of us are teenagers anymore. But so some of it is simply common sense narrative. What A drives B, and we can intuitively see that. So, Ms. James, you wanted to say something, I thought?
Yes, I wanted to say thank you guys at Urban League for all the work that you're doing and all the community support that you provide. I was asking about sustainability. I see the work that you're doing and how it's trending upward with the funding cuts that have been happening nationwide. How, other than City of GR, how is funding set up to continue to support this in the long run?
Well, I'll start with the fact that currently we have a federal grant, which has not been cut, thankfully, but we have a federal grant which is allowing us to support Cure Violence currently, our portion of that. In fact, there was an item this morning at the fiscal committee where, with past fiscal committee, hopefully it passes tonight, but where we were contracting with Cure Violence at the rate of $750,000 for next year's programming as well.
Thank you.
And then just from the overall standpoint on the fiscal part of it, the city has increased that investment over the time here. And we've been very appreciative of that, and it funds most of it, but there still needs to be some fundraising that's done outside, so to have a complete and robust program.
Just
That's what I wanted to know. For continued growth, you would need an increase in funding?
Well, what the city has given us right now is keeping us going, but to have a full-blown program, we're going to circle back with some of the folks that originally funded the pilot and see what their interest is. This is important as well.
Yeah, Mayor, if I could, I'd just remind or inform and remind some that when we started this program, I remember the first year we had $50,000, and we really had to leverage more private funding than public funding. And at the time, Corwell was one of the first in seeders of funding. $300,000 at the time, and then we've been able to get some leverage, federal funding, state funding, and I think in the with the state budget, we also have some resources that we need to program around violence prevention in the future.
So thank you all. Go ahead. If you want to say one more thing, go
I would
ahead.
like to respond to a couple of comments, Mayor, that you had. So one of those things that you said, high-risk individuals, when we had the flag football, there wasn't high-risk individuals. It was people outside our targeted age group, 6 to 13. And the idea was it was 750 people, family members and children, who learned how to play flag football. But we also did conflict resolution. We also talked about responsibility, integrity, and all these things. So when will we see the results of that? Maybe not right away, but we are engaging the entire community. In addition, when City Vibes was going on Fridays, Saturdays, nights, for those 8 weeks during the summer, there were no violence among that target group of 14 to 24. So if we engage these children, these young adults, they typically will not have time to do other things. And we're working very hard to do that. That's where additional funding can come in, because we're only equipped to work with those high-risk individuals. What I've asked my team to do is work overtime to do these other things that they're doing right now.
Sure. Thank you. Okay. Thanks so much for the presentation. It's great. And thanks for the work. I know it's anything that's as in the weeds as that can be stressful at times, I'm sure, and really, really appreciate it. And I'm so glad. I mean, we have it's a really important piece of a global question of like, how do we have a peaceful community? So thank you for that work. It's so important that we try to build the peaceable kingdom in Grand Rapids. So appreciate it. So I think we're going to move on to our next agenda item, and that is discussion of a potential ordinance for response to, or better modeling potentially around amplified sound around medical facilities. And
So I have this item. I'm happy to step down to the podium if that makes more sense, or I can advance the slides from here.
if you sit up here, we can pretend you're 6'6".
Well, I will start off and recognize some people that have been involved in this conversation for a very long time. We have community stakeholders, community champions in the audience. I know that they've submitted written communications for the clerk to consider. They have been nothing but patient and kind and understanding about the complexities that surround this issue. And so thank you for being here today. I suspect you'll see communications from Tom Sinus and the Neighborhood Association, if you haven't already seen their thoughts on this item, because that's kind of where this item comes from. Whenever the city attorney is presenting an item, you know that it's a challenging needle to thread, that there are some complexities involved in it, and that there's some concerns that maybe staff has with some of the concepts and maybe the prioritization, that this is not driven by staff. There's not a staff recommendation coming to you right now, but out of respect for the community members and some of the elected officials from the committee of the whole meeting, we've brought this and kind of parked it here in public safety because it does have to do with public safety ordinance and how we prioritize certain community concerns, as well as what unintended consequences might result from ordinance changes related to police contacts and how we're policing our community. So some background, we've had complaints. I see Deputy Chief Maycroft in the audience too. He and I, at least since my time here, have tried to troubleshoot this from an enforcement and a responsive way, dating back to 2023 and prior, where most of our complaints around amplified sound and medical facilities were generated around Fulton Street. As you may know, there was a women's health care clinic there, and there's residences and neighborhoods around that particular building that no longer is operating in the same way. Since that business closed down, the noise in question, or the complaint about conduct, has shifted in our community down to the Cherry Street neighborhood and the Heritage Hill neighborhood. And that was new activity to a certain extent for the neighborhood. And so we started to, have good conversations with the neighbors and the businesses about the challenges with enforcement. Oftentimes, police were out monitoring other, maybe higher emergent situations and didn't allow them to respond as quickly. When they did respond, the noise was either different or maybe the people were gone that were originally making the noise. And so there has historically been, whether it's Fulton or Cherry Street, challenges with enforcing noise complaints here and elsewhere within our community. The additional issue is First Amendment considerations. Whenever we're regulating people's right to assemble or speak in public spaces, there's a nod to the First Amendment and a respect for the First Amendment that has to be taken into consideration. It's not a constitutional right that is without regulation abilities for local government, but it's something that we certainly hold near and dear here in Grand Rapids, whether it's free speech at Calder Plaza or at the courthouse or other places. If we're going to regulate amplified sound, we have to be very careful about how we do that to make sure we're not inviting litigation from people and potential rights violations. We took this topic to the Committee of the Whole, and they suggested that while they received the neighborhood concerns and were maybe open to further conversations, they really wanted to hear from a broader representation of the medical community. So I worked with Dr. Riley Mukovic from the Communications Department, our Community Engagement Manager, to host a virtual listening session. We invited everyone from the medical community that we had contacts to, and we also created a survey designed to gauge their view of the issue and also their opinions about whether or not additional ordinance changes would be helpful to them. The major themes that came out of that, first of all, there were 4 additional medical facilities that participated in the listening session and responded to the survey. The main themes were that they had little experience that would cause them to be concerned about amplified sound at their facilities, but they were concerned about the health, safety, and well-being of their employees and their clients. And so in that vein, they would be interested in and potentially supportive of ordinance changes that would support the health, safety, and well-being of their staff and their clients. The question I have to the Public Safety Committee is this something that should be prioritized and codified within the city of Grand Rapids? I have a couple of more slides to walk through because we've had some staff concerns about this that have been raised in the contemplation behind the scenes, and I just want to lay those out for you to talk through, and hopefully that'll help you inform your guidance to us. This is what our current prohibited noise ordinance says around amplified sound, that no person shall operate any device creating amplified sound on a public or private right-of-way that is louder than average conversational level at a distance of 100 feet or more, measured vertically and horizontally. There's a long legal line of analysis and cases that help inform our current noise ordinance. There were problems with our old noise ordinance that related to sound coming from businesses. There is challenges with measuring sound related to decibels and the science behind measuring sound. We've had complaints about the sound coming from certain types of activities that is just inherently challenging to measure because of sound that is being made elsewhere in the neighborhood. When I had visited this particular spot on Cherry Street, sometimes the leaf blowers and the lawn mowers were louder than the amplified sound, and other times the amplified sound was truly nuisance level that I thought would be offensive to a reasonable person's standard. So those sorts of challenges exist with measuring sound regardless of what our ordinance says. Special events, protests, and picketing events, you can get exempt from our noise ordinance through permitting, and there's also the ability to make sound and gather and assemble without using amplified sound that I guess enshrines the First Amendment free speech throughout our community. Time, place, and manner considerations are acceptable. Protesting and picketing are generally protected, but this idea of amplified sound in certain spaces is something that the courts and the U.S. Supreme Court has recognized that you can regulate amplified sound in certain situations. Those ordinances must be applied reasonably and judiciously. That if there are prior restraints on speech, that deserves particularly close scrutiny. Here are some content-neutral regulations. We can't tell you whether or not you can or can't hold up a Detroit Lions sign in a certain space, but the way that you do that and share that message might be subject to regulation. So, for example, these are some sensitive places in our community that the courts and law has recognized as allowing for content-neutral regulations. For example, polling locations, medical facilities, funerals, schools, and residences. Some of these things are, I guess, fair game for considering noise ordinance regulations on amplified sound. We did work with our zoning and planning department to try to identify where are medical facilities in our community. You can see that they are pretty far-reaching across our geography. That little map in the upper left-hand corner is our totality of the city jurisdiction, and downtown area in general is blown up here with the Cherry neighborhood medical facility highlighted in yellow. This is one of the staff concerns. Medical facility within our zoning and planning code is really broadly defined. And so from dentist offices, I believe, to other clinics that are not your traditional hospital type situation, those would all likely be included if we were to borrow the definition of healthcare facility or medical facility from our zoning code. To do a different definition would make this a little bit more challenging, not impossible, but that was one of the staff concerns that was raised. So I'll let the city manager and the police chief and the managing director of oversight and public accountability speak for themselves. But when we talked about, where this fell in staff's purview of prioritization and what might the unintended consequences be of more police responses to situations of amplified sound, there were concerns that were raised. This is generally a civil infraction. If you're a first offense noise ordinance violator, it's a ticket. If you continue to be a habitual noise ordinance offender, it can graduate up to a misdemeanor for a third offense, I believe. And so I know there's ongoing conversation about the wisdom behind that graduated penalty, but potential misdemeanors in this area is something that I don't think anybody is excited about. We do see when police respond to a situation, if someone thinks they know the law better than the police officers, oftentimes those situations can escalate and cause unnecessary charges for failing to obey or resisting and obstructing. So those are some conversations staff has had. I'll let them answer any questions you might have about it. The law department kind of stands by ready to do the will of the city commission and hear from you and do additional research if needed. But those are some things that we wanted you to be informed about before giving additional direction.
So unless I could be wrong, is anybody else up here besides Phil a lawyer? Okay. So as the second lawyer here, I'm going to make a couple framing comments if I can. So I think that in the legal field, there's this phrase that hard cases make bad law. So I want to make sure that that this commission looks at this as a policy thing and not we have a specific problem with this intersection thing. And the other problem that I always talk about for politics in general is that we all have a phrase, there ought to be a law. So legislation and policy can often come out of some weird thing happens and someone's like, there ought to be a law, right? So I remember legislative colleague of mine wanted to have a state legislation on who got the family cat during a divorce, and like that, one of his friends had a problem with cat custody. Like that probably doesn't need to rise to the level of something that needs state legislation. So I just want to point out that from my perspective, I think there's a question here about how we regulate this issue or whether we regulate this issue. And I think that the current noise ordinance we have, roughly speaking, is necessary but not sufficient. So I think that having the noise ordinance we have is good in general, because I don't want my next door neighbor buying himself the world's biggest sound system and starting to blast AC/DC at 2 in the morning in within a half-mile radius. And so that the ordinance we have is a general backstop against like massive obnoxiousness in the community, for lack of a better way to put it. I think we all have a right to be left alone, and that's something Americans don't really appreciate as often as maybe they should. Like, I think I have a right to not have jet skis wake me up at 2 o'clock in the morning if I'm out on a small lake. I think I have a right to not have Harley Davidsons wake me up at 2 o'clock in the morning if I could figure out how to make that happen. We often think no one's going to tell me what to do, and that means I have the right to do stuff in the public space, and I can just do it because I can do it because it's America. Well, we all have a right to peace and quiet, and we all have a right to go about our lives in a civil society, and really that seems to me to be the question here. So, yeah, there are always First Amendment questions whenever we're talking about things, and the reason that I thought that a amplified question made a lot of sense is because this is not about whether any group of 50 or 100 or 2 people could stand in front of my house and scream at the top of their lungs unamplified. And there's a natural limit to how long they can do that because they get hoarse voices. Amplification lets you sustain things into ways that can be, way, way more intrusive. So I also know that at least the case the presenting instance here, maybe in cases, legal cases, you're always like, this thing happened to this person, does the court take jurisdiction? So we're sort of taking jurisdiction over a question because of a specific place where there's a problem. I will tell you, at that problem, I know that those folks feel like our current noise ordinance doesn't work because when the police come out, we don't have a decibel, like they don't have decibel readers, I don't have a decibel reader. How do we figure this out? How do we know? The advantage of saying amplified or unamplified is that's pretty clear. Like, do you have a bullhorn or don't you? So we're not sitting there measuring how loud somebody's yelling. We're asking, do you have this piece of equipment that makes you really, really loud or not? If 500 people wanted to go protest in front of Corwell tomorrow, they could do that. But, the amplification is, I think, a fairly good surgical way to mitigate the stress of those kinds of things. And I think that I'm a huge fan of talking about this in terms of medical facilities, and I just want to name, we now have a head of federal medical stuff who doesn't believe in vaccines. Well, what if we had a whole bunch of people who started coming to Corwell and yelling that they didn't want vaccines? Or I ran against somebody for state office once who literally was running on the campaign that we shouldn't have any medical treatment in the community because if everyone just ate the biblical diet, we wouldn't have any need for medicine in the community. Now, what if that guy organized a bunch of protests at Corwell and said everyone should just be eating the grains they prescribed in Ezekiel and no one should go get cancer treatment? If he wants to come yell, that's one thing. If he comes with a bullhorn and starts starts citing Ezekiel over and over again at a cancer treatment center, you can see that's not just going to be, you can imagine that'd be traumatic for the people getting cancer care. And with medical care, there's a lot of, that really ties to secrecy for a lot of us, right? We don't want to talk, when somebody tells me I had an operation, I never say, oh, what for, right? We don't want to talk about our medical stuff a lot. It's very close to so it's really deeply, pretty closely connected, it seems to me, to our desire to be left alone. Do I want to go get treatment for, a hernia surgery while riding the gauntlet through amplified sound? That's a real thing, right? And it's different than, than whether Elon Musk has protests at his car dealership, right? I can work around that. I don't buy a Tesla, but I can't work around needing my hernia getting fixed unless I don't want to get my hernia fixed. So I think that tying it to healthcare centers makes sense. So I think personally, I'm leading, I know, on this discussion, but I think that this is reasonably tailored. I don't think it places an undue burden on people's ability to make their free expression of the First Amendment happen. I think that this presenting place, I will just tell you guys, like, I hear this a lot, a block and a half away, when it happens. I don't just hear it when I'm walking by where these folks are using amplified sound. Like, that amplified sound really does spread. So, given that we already have an ordinance, I think there's a separate question of, like, if we have an ordinance, we're already trying to moderate this, but if it's not enforceable, an ordinance that's not enforceable is a broken ordinance. So the question is, do we have an opportunity to make it better? So I just wanted to lay all those parameters out there before folks weigh in. So
Mayor, we're going to lose some people at one. So
yeah, but we've been 10 months waiting for this, so I wanted to frame it. So, Ms. James.
You asked at the beginning, were there any other lawyers? So I just wanted to ask, are there any other women on this dais? No. Okay. So as a woman who would be utilizing that facility, because that is the most of the people who are using it in question, I think it also goes into they have the right to seek medical treatment in any way they see fit without being harassed. And our great community leader, Tom Sinus over there, I asked him for some examples, and I have an example here from the city of Sacramento, and it is to the point that you said, Mayor LeGrand, it's about using the amplifier. It is unlawful for any person to use a sound amplifier in a public place or upon any public sidewalk, street, alley, highway, or other public right-of-way of a city within 100 feet of a healthcare facility during the hours of operation. This distance is measured from the property line of the property upon which the healthcare facility is located. So it's not, you guys don't have that. I will have that emailed all to you. But it's not measuring the decibels. It is measuring the feet and if you have an amplifier or not. And that is enforceable. And then it also, they have a subsection that, law enforcement and fire department can. But the city of Detroit went even further. They said no person within 100 feet or radius or any entrance door to a healthcare facility shall knowingly approach within 8 feet of another person. They have a personal bubble zone around that individual, and then 100 feet for amplifiers as well. So
There are other cities working on this.
yes, so we can make our ordinance better to protect the women or any persons who are utilizing those facilities. That's all.
Great. Any other input here?
I'll just say, as one who actually worked in family planning for 10 years prior to current vocation that I'm in, and actually now currently working in Heritage Hill area, and to hear the capacity in which our sister lifted up and other cities are working on these capacities, we have to also look at the workers that actually work in the facilities in all capacities, and then also how is this going to impact the calls that are made within the confines of the law, and how are we measuring these things? It's both sides that have to go into this advisement. And granted, 100 feet, I think that's what the current ordinance is. If we're really going to measure that, and really take that to heart, we have to really make sure that everybody's aware in that capacity. And so more involvement needs to be done. And I look at all of the staff concerns that have been lifted up and take that under advisement as well.
So the one thing that I'd like to express very clearly, I do not want somebody going to jail for violating this ordinance. And so I think if we were going to modify this ordinance, we can also take the opportunity to say that repeat infractions should not become a jailable offense, because for me, that is a huge potential First Amendment tripwire problem, because, if we're going to do this, the question is what are the weight of the consequences? So, and I think that is sort of First Amendment adjacent. In other words, if somebody really decided they wanted to keep paying the fines and keep paying the fines and keep paying the fines and violate our ordinance, we could have an escalated fine architecture, but I don't want this to be an incarceratable behavior, because I don't think it rises to the level of something we need to incarcerate for.
Mayor, after Commissioner Robbins, I'd like to remark.
Okay.
Yeah, no, appreciate it. And thanks for the update presentation. I know when we had a good discussion about this, back with the full commission, there was a number of us who had some concerns about, First Amendment rights and trying not to broaden the conversation to be more about what's being said, but specifically about the noise and the enforcement, because that's where you get into really sticky territory. And I think one of my concerns was, we know there's only a few select locations where this is an issue. And if we do an ordinance that's, broad and covers all healthcare facilities, then, we could say we're limiting where that type of First Amendment practice could take place. But at the same time, too, then I think it opens up the can of worms to say, well, this is disproportionately affecting what we're saying and not necessarily where we're saying it. So that's a concern of mine. I guess for me, there's been a number of businesses across our city that have had people show up and protest, as you're aware. To me, it almost feels like the conversation, if we're going to spend any staff resources on it, should be more around how do we make what's currently on the books more enforceable, whether there's new technology out there, whether we need to invest in more, decibel equipment to understand, what is appropriate and what's not. So I think all that to say, and just sort of echoing some of the comments from colleagues at that broader discussion too, to me, this wouldn't be a priority, given everything else that the city staff is working on. So if, at some point there's a way to look into more of a better mechanisms of enforcement for the existing amplified sound, that would be my preference.
Thank you, Interim City Attorney Strom, for bringing the conversation to this body. I know that it is an ongoing conversation, now going years, more than months. If we could zoom out as a committee for just a moment, I want to recognize part of the presentation did include police force at nonviolent calls. We've been very clear, I think, talking about our encouragement as we see different statistics regarding mental health professionals being part of our response system. So I think that taking this and being delicate around the conversation about what enforcement will ultimately look like is really important. So I'm just grateful that that made it into this presentation. And then as we consider ordinance, I thought what Ms. James brought up was lovely, something that is enforceable, which I think is the problem we're experiencing here. Looking at health facilities as a finite term where it is loosely defined today may or may not be the solution. I work just down from the location in question, right on Cherry Street. I walk by this every single day. And I would just like to note that I work at an institution that deals with people who are experiencing hardship and really hoping for discretion and privacy, and that the amplified sound at this location is impacting the work of others. And I only bring that up, not because of the address we're talking about or the topic in general, but to say that if we're going to look at an ordinance, what is the ultimate goal and who are we trying to protect? Because if we make this about a specific health institution or type of health reform, et cetera, we might miss the actual population we're trying to protect and serve. And so I'm appreciative of the conversation. I think it merits a lot more discussion.
City Manager, you wanted to...
Yep, I was going to ask, is anybody else on the dais here, City Manager? Since we're doing you, or is anybody else in the audience, Police Chief or Oversight Director? So I think you're right. There's intended and unintended, and certainly for the purposes and making sure people have access to health care and are able to do so without impediment and disruption. I think those are all good causes. But I would appreciate the deliberate nature of proceeding, because rarely do I ever get a moment where the police chief and oversight director are in agreement. This is one of those in which they're both cautioning us to be sure of not only the intended impact, but the unintended impact. Particularly, if you have an ordinance with no teeth in your, then you got to ask yourself, what are you solving? So if you send a social worker or someone else out there to enforce, which I don't recommend we do, but if that's the kind of you send someone who's not able to offer deterrence, I'm not sure what the compliance would be and what are we really solving. But if those disruptions continue, the more contact we have with law enforcement, the higher the possibility for escalation, even when people are, potentially nonviolently using it, but if they're not obeying lawful commands, we know how that turns out. So I just want, and I would really ask that we hear from our police chief when, if not now, but when he comes up, his perspective on that, as well as Mr. Davis. So that's we've heard, again, we want to hear from the residents who are citizens on the dais, obviously from our elected officials, but I think in this instance, when it's the staff that would enforce it, we should also hear their perspective.
Thanks, City Manager. I want to point out, however, there's a really, really important line here, which is, there's a phrase for it, taking the law into your own hands. We really don't want vigilante, individual volunteer action. Like, it's generally not law enforcement's favorite thing, I would venture to say, when people start trying to enforce laws who aren't law enforcement. Because that gets you into weird space all the time, or if people feel like their need for public order is not met. And so if the community doesn't give people a meaningful response to their desire for public order, then what we're saying is you're on your own, and being on your own can produce some really not optimal results too. So saying, what if we send the police out for this? They might escalate with the police. Well, if you don't send police out, people are pretty good at escalating on their own without any police interaction at all. And certainly I don't want that happening in a vacuum. I don't want frustration bubbling over into bigger problems because we didn't have a response to a felt community need for order.
And I don't disagree. I'm just saying where police priority is needed are on more violent crimes than what we have before us.
And real quick, I appreciate everything everybody said. Definitely not in favor of limiting any free speech. I am in favor of figuring out a law that will be clear, enforceable, but unbiased.
So I don't know if that got us anywhere, but thank you, Commissioner, and I understand you have to leave. So let's move on to our presentation from our police department. And I assume the Chief, you can feel free to give us some color commentary on the last item if you want now, but if you want to comment on it later,
I'll just roll with it while I try to get this set up to riffing on what.
Before you go on, Chief, so we don't kind of meander in this maze of ambiguity. So we had the presentation. we took no action on it at this point. So, City Attorney, what are you suggesting are the next steps?
I appreciate Commissioner Kilgore's kind of reserved remarks. I don't know if you're being pensive, but I don't know if you want this to cut, because I heard two different positions between Mayor LeGrand and Commissioner Robbins. You three make the decisions of this body, and so I either need a tie-breaking vote or I'll get back to you, but I think it should be done.
Sure, yeah. I think we've had a lot of discussion about this. I hear the concerns, especially of yours, of talking about making it a broader conversation. I had an interesting slew of emails about a neighbor who works on snowmobiles in neighborhoods. So this needs to be a bigger conversation, but I believe just in line with us talking about healthcare facilities, I think it's an acute problem that needs to be addressed as soon as possible, and then continue to look into these. So if we set forth an ordinance now and go forward on that, does not mean we can't revisit it. So I'm good on moving forward with updating our sound ordinance.
Okay, I'll make a draft and work with the city manager to determine if a draft revision to our ordinance would come back to this committee or go directly to committee of the whole.
Great,
Thank you.
Chief.
commentary, or should I just?
No, please.
Okay.
Yeah, no.
All right.
Yeah. That's the order of the day
Sharing,
right now.
Mr. Strum's view, the police department stands ready to act on whatever the commission decides. I will share some of the concerns that we have anytime that there's an extremely contentious issue and we get it with police protests or other very polarized topics, and the police are called in to enforce, even when the police officers take every step procedurally, legally that they're supposed to take. Oftentimes it leads to either very, very upset people or sometimes a use of force to enforce it. So that's certainly a concern. And then to Mr. Davis's point, actually, if you remember the discussions we had, this is years ago when we passed ordinances such as personal property on the public way, concern of that was, and the police going to be out arresting unhoused people, and that has not turned out that way. It's from my opinion, a very effective ordinance that's been pushed forward through communication. Communication, and very little enforcement. So I'm just giving a very gray answer. We're ready to do what's called on us, and I see all sides of the issues, and I certainly haven't interacted with a lot of the community down on Cherry Street or in other places that have these concerns. I understand the concerns of the community as well.
Thanks. So, your presentation.
Okay, and I'm joined today by, we have a command staff meeting after this, so they brought everybody with me, so we have about 250 years of police wisdom behind me if there's a question that I drop the ball on or ask for a phone a friend on. So as you can see, good news still on the auto thefts, and better news, something that I've spoken on. These crimes were committed overwhelmingly by the young people in our community, young people that didn't have the proper supports from the adults in the city of Grand Rapids. So to see everybody come together and support them in so many ways has really made an impact in the crime across our city. You can see the graph again, robbery totals trending in the right direction. We want to keep that up. I have spoken before, aggravated assaults, we don't see a trend. The one thing I will say is that as we've increased to appropriate levels of staffing, the calls that we get, those 911 calls that, hey, somebody threatened me in a park, whereas 3 years ago, oftentimes an officer, by the time the officer got there, that complainant had moved on and wasn't making the report. Everybody's getting to make the report now. So these don't tell as much of an accurate story. Just because it's an aggravated assault, it does not mean someone has been shot. That's a different slide altogether. And here's the person shot slide. So you can see the numbers trending in the right direction. Tragically, on November 6th, and then again on November 12th, we had murders in our city. Recently, we announced that the November 6th case, which was Donovan Moody down on Hollister and Wealthy, offenders arrested and charged for homicide in that case. And interestingly, that individual was a 44-year-old who had previously served time for a murder and was out. It was part of a long-standing feud. The reason I mention his age is because we focus so much on the young people in our community that it was somewhat, if there's any good to take it of the conclusion of the story was that this was not teenagers, these were not young people. Having said that, November 11th on Veterans Day, we had an 18-year-old young man who fired rounds at police officers, obviously probably the worst decision he'll ever make in his life, hopefully, and very thankful that the police officers especially were not injured in that encounter, alarming all the same, but because of the two murders, the officer-involved shooting and a couple other shootings with not serious injuries. There's been a lot of questions in the community. What is going on? Is there a connection? Is this a trend, et cetera? As these investigations have played out, we see that it was just a perfect storm of each individual coincidental. The Mr. Griggs, the murderer in the Hollister case, no relation to anything else. The young man who shot a police officer is no relation to anything else. Making great progress on the investigation of the November 12th murder. Nothing I can share with you, but I will say, I think I mentioned last public safety meeting how optimistic I was for increased, better numbers in clearances. This time around, we recently closed a January of 2023 murder down on the 1900 block of Division Street. And as you mentioned earlier, Mayor LeGrand, we don't like to throw around the term cold case because we don't want families to think that it's really cold to us. It's not cold to us. And when the detectives are doing such a great professional, tenacious job, we're not always able to share all that's going on behind the scenes. So thankful to get the answers out there on that homicide, which was almost 3 years old. As you can see from the map, pretty well spread geographically across the city. That doesn't account for the past few weeks where certainly it was more focused in the southeast side there. as I said, charges in the Moody case, a lot of, I don't want to be dismissive of that, Donovan's case. I did not know Donovan, but I got to meet his parents on November 6th outside. Very, very sweet, kind, caring people, you could tell. Devastated for their loss. Looking still to get answers for Amari's family and Niles and Deshaun's and Marcus's and Randy's, and the detectives are working so hard on those. So that, I believe that makes it 7 or 8 of the 13 cases, which are closed. 8 of 13 now closed by arrest. As I said last time, these numbers are going to increase next time we meet. As you can see from the 23 rate now up to 25. We're going to keep that going. 13 so far year to date deaths by overdose in our city, and 415 illegally possessed guns. That's taken just through October. So more obviously this month and next month will be far over an average of 1 a day. And most of those are taken, illegally possessed weapons taken off people with no use of force. And it's not the sort of thing that makes it in the news. So just by very effective police work. And with that, any questions for me or the 2 deputy chiefs and 7 captains sitting behind me?
So, Chief, I have a couple, maybe they're both comments, well, maybe one's a question, we'll see. So first of all, I want to state the obvious, which you don't always state, about the clearance rate thing, and that is, it's really important to apprehend folks as quickly as possible. It's also important to get it right. So this is cleared by arrest, and so there are things like if the person's a fugitive, well, you're not going to be able to arrest them until you locate them, and if they've left the community, that's going to be there can be a lag there, even if you know who you're looking for. But it's also true that if you've got multiple suspects, being really, really sure that you don't arrest the wrong person and then not get the right conviction really also means necessarily the freshest cases are going to have a lower clearance rate just because you're trying to get it right.
Yeah, Mayor, and I can see you're thinking as you're putting your prosecutor hat back on, and that's a constant conversation that we have back and forth with Prosecutor Becker. And in the case of the 2023 homicide, that individual was actually in Michigan Department of Corrections custody. So that allowed him to say to us, hey, I think you're there. Let's cross a few more T's, dot a few more I's, and gives us, because that he's already incapacitated, we know there's not a murderer wandering around on the street. When we don't have a shooter identified, there's that much more urgency, but it's all of that plays into consideration as we move along.
The other question, and this is my old prosecutor hat, I know that when you report out crime stats, you're sort of using the baskets that the FBI gives you. And so this is maybe for the audience, but at least it's I first want to thank you for, again, I'm always grateful to see shootings and not simply homicides.
That was because of you, Mr.
Right.
Mayor.
And that's not an FBI analysis. But
Right.
my next question is, when I see ag assault, I go back to being a prosecutor, and I know what ag assault is in Michigan, and I know what felonious assault is in Michigan. Does the FBI not use like a felonious assault number, or is that why we're not tracking that? Or you just, you got to make your cuts somewhere.
Yeah, and we can provide, we don't have to follow NIBRS or UCR reporting to provide the information out to you, but that's what our current records management system, that's how it's set up. So that's sort of, but yeah, I could get more specific. That's why we pulled out those shooting numbers, because when we were looking at the ag assault numbers, as you noticed, it just was not telling the story, because if there's 20 people hanging out in Hartside Park and somebody pulls out a pocket knife and drunkenly says something and then runs away. Now I got 20 victims of ag assault, and wow, crime's out of control down there. Like, is it though? So it could tell a better story. That's why I think the shooting slide is important, and we could pull some more of those out.
Right. And so, and just so everyone up here knows, like, what we're not tracking when we track shootings, obviously, is things that involve a non-gun weapon. And so that's a category. So ag assault sounds scary, but ag assault basically in civilian terms boils down to, was there medical attention needed? Was there something that was, but that could be, there's a big wide range in there, right? So in terms of how the community perceives things, I think most of us would perceive being chased with a butcher knife as much more scary than somebody punched me and I needed a stitch in my forearm. So sometimes felonious assaults don't involve any injury at all. So there's complexity there, and I'm not suggesting that we should disaggregate that data, but it's at least worth us all knowing, like, I think that for most of us, like, a home invasion is a much different thing to be talking about, for example, than a trespassing, right? Like, we don't want people in our house at night.
Unfortunately, we don't get too many home invasions.
Right.
So
Similarly,
the slides would be pretty boring.
Right. I don't want
Yeah.
people interacting with me with a weapon, right? That's a much bigger deal for me than did I get hurt even. So, so thanks. And I appreciate the shooting disaggregation because you essentially told us a fuller story there, which I love. But I at least wanted to point out that when we look at those ag assault numbers, the word ag can sound scary, but that includes a lot of things which don't rise to the level that most of us would be really incredibly freaked out by them. So it's a fairly big number, but there's a lot of, I don't want to say less acute.
The word you're looking for is nonsense. Yes,
No.
there's a lot of nonsense in there, and I know because I read all these reports, and some of them we err on the side of taking reports.
Yes.
And so, but you've given me good direction. I think it'd probably be more helpful because I believe this is probably the 5th meeting I've stood here and said, it's kind of flat and it doesn't tell a story. So it's usefulness maybe has gone away, and I'll try and get some more appropriate data for next meeting.
Yeah, so I don't know if anybody else has any comments, but again, thank you to the force. Obviously, these numbers it's really, really nice to see. It's not nice to see any negative event, but it's nice to see the basket of negative events getting smaller. Yeah, Commissioner.
Not yet, no.
Well, what do I call you, committee member? It sounds so clunky. I always go with
I
commissioner.
appreciate that. 2 quick questions. Never probably, but anyway. For time, real quick. If you can give any color or any commentary on 2 questions that were posed to those of us that presented the first round. One being about the correlation, and not cause and effect, but a correlation between, in particular in this case, Cure Violence's activities within the community as it relates to these, what you reported. And secondly, and I'll rephrase that if necessary, particularly in Second Ward, where we talked about the nuance that one of the factors is trending up, aggravated assaults, and how there is a population outside, demographics is what my colleague used, but a population outside of our target area that needs other specific resources potentially to reach them, being the unhoused and those that live down in the Hartside Park area.
First question I have a hold on, so I'll just say that first. And I was head of research and analysis in Chicago when I was there. I have worked in the past for leaders of police agencies that like to take credit when there's we had a great summer and there was a 10% drop in murder. That's on me. I got that 10% drop in murder. I am not going to be the police chief that takes credit for a whatever percent drop. I hope it drops down to 0. But the day you're saying, yep, I did it, look what I did, you're then taking credit for the next year that's bad. Oh, what did you do wrong? Were you out shooting people? So I'm not going to take credit for it. I know how tricky crime statistics are, and I know there's a lot more to go into it. But what my favorite part about hearing about Cure Violence, and I'll tell you that I work a lot. I'm a little bit of a workaholic, and I see Mr. Ridgway at all sorts of meetings that I say it. So I was like, man, this guy's working harder than I am. So I think he's doing a fantastic job. I like to hear most important to me are those anecdotal stories, because when I hear about one kid, one young person who got services, who got a job, who got hope in his life and left that high risk lifestyle for that high potential lifestyle, the rest of the numbers are meaningless. If you can, that starfish there, if you could say this person was changed by Cure Violence, it's all worth it for me.
Thanks.
Yeah, yes, sir. And I don't remember. We were going to talk about something else. Unhoused. Just the difficulty that you would have about region. Yeah. So, and you mentioned the model Cure Violence, and you will all know this, and is sort of there's a little bit of a disconnect. We don't want to be seen, me and you, going arm in arm down, knocking on people's doors like, hey, wait, he's with the police. I get that, and that does pose a little bit of a challenge, because normally when we're identifying those young people who mostly would be in need of those services, we're doing it through the criminal justice process where we're putting handcuffs on kids. And so the trick is there. I will say kudos to Prosecutor Becker, and I think you're working with juvenile probation or parole, and he has, over the past couple of years, really moved in a way that he's looking for alternative corrections options to go to and say, okay, yes, are you eligible for placement? Are you eligible for juvenile detention? Yep, but Cure Violence, there's some other organization out there that has a different way, and hopefully it's a way that gets you mentorship, that it gives you some sort of services to set you on the path to make you, like I like to say, high potential, not high risk. Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Thanks, everyone, for your patience, or most of you. We lost two, but thank you, Chief. Thanks for the update. And yes, Mr. Canfield.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to, for the benefit of the committee and the public who may be watching, to remind that we have our Commission Night Out meeting tonight. It's in the 2nd Ward, 1400 Fuller, which is GRPS University. And the focus topic for the engagement will actually be public safety and listening to residents about what a safe community means to them. Police chief will be there, along with a number of officers, Brandon Davis, Oversight Office, and doors open, I think, at 4:30, dinner from 4:45 to 5:30, and then the engagement will kick off right around 5:30 to 6:30 or so, and we hope people will be able to join.
Indeed. Thank you, everyone.